everyone. I had a request to talk about radical acceptance, and you'll see we've got a cameo by Gabby, the Labradoodle, in the back, who's very interested in all the kids that are outside. But hopefully that won't be too distracting as we talk about radical acceptance. The reason that I jumped on this opportunity is because this is one of my absolute favorite skills. It is applicable to pretty much everything. And I think the best example is that this has been my go-to skill in the last year, implying the chaos, the craziness of 2020 and the pandemic, because there are so many things that we just can't change. And our goal really is to try to control our own experience as much as we can. And that includes limiting suffering. So the equation for radical acceptance, which was outlined by Marsha Linehan, the developer, researcher of dialectical behavioral therapy, is pain, which is inevitable. That is a part of life, and there's nothing that we can do about pain. It happens. It's part of our experience, our human experience. And as highly sensitive people, it is particularly applicable because we feel so intensely, and oftentimes just feeling, even if it's not necessarily pain, is really depleting, and it siphons a lot of our energy, which can then turn into a secondary form of pain. So pain plus resistance equals suffering. So resistance is the experience of any form of tension. So that can be physical tension, it can be cognitive tension, it can be emotional tension, or spiritual tension. I mean, that gets into some pretty specific and kind of advanced applications of this concept, but it is relevant. So radical acceptance equals pain, the inevitable pain, plus acceptance of that pain. That does not mean that we think it is okay. It just means that we accept that it is. We accept that this is something that is real. It is happening right now. And the only way that we can change it is to first understand where it is. So this reminds me of an analogy that I use, which is one of using a map. So the first step in using a map is to identify where we are on that map. So if we think that we are in Washington, D.C., starting off our journey, but in reality we're in Seattle, we're going to be really ineffective at getting to the place where we need to be. So the first step is understanding and accepting radically that we are in Washington, D.C. Maybe that makes our journey way longer. Maybe we're trying to get to South America. And that makes the journey longer, and it's kind of overwhelming to think about how many more steps we have to take. But it's one less step than if we were thinking that we were starting from Seattle. So that's probably the best way to understand radical acceptance. It is understanding that we will be so much further ahead if we start off with the appropriate and the correct, accurate starting point versus thinking that we're somewhere else. As much as it may ease our pain to think that we are in a different place, ultimately it is just delaying our arrival at our destination because we have to adjust our coordinates from there. So radical acceptance is the experience of the inevitable pain that life has, that comes with life, the difficulties that we face, plus the understanding and the acceptance that this is where I am without resistance, without the tension and the loss of energy that occurs when we resist the reality of what is. So if I continue to assume that I'm in Seattle and I'm trying to plan my trip to Chile or some far off distant point, I'm going to really come across a lot of struggles and obstacles if I keep planning my trip from Washington, D.C. From Seattle versus Washington, D.C. So The resistance comes in lots of different ways. It comes in the form of rumination, which is thinking about something over and over and over, expecting a different result. This is probably the most common experience of cognitive resistance. If I think about it a little bit longer, if I think about it a little bit differently, maybe it'll change the reality. Maybe if I think about it enough times in different ways, I'll wake up and I'll magically be in Seattle versus Washington, D.C.